Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today I thought we'd get stuck into the pasta developers for October of 2020, and as usual, thank you to Coke Spray and the team for putting together this wonderful list that we can have a look at. When it comes to it, we're going to be having a look at ground vehicles today, or ground forces, just because, at least this time, I find them a little bit more interesting, and also I know a little bit more about them, so I don't have to do as much research. So let's get started, let's get into it with Flamme Bleu, and he is talking about the 105 HM7 Priest, the self-propelled howitzer, very much used all over the place when it came to World War II. Basically, what this machine is a M3 chassis, which it's based off with, of course, an extra superstructure, and then the 105 M2 howitzer, which was named the M101 after World War II. It was used like an artillery piece because, well, it's a self-propelled howitzer, and used for infantry support, and it also, at some points during the war, fought against panzer divisions, which is probably not the best idea. It was used all over the place. It was used by English forces in North Africa during the Second Battle of El Alamein. It was used by the American forces in the Pacific Theater and also the Western Front. And it was also used by French forces with the 2nd Division Blindé during the Battle of Normandy and also France's liberation. It was also used massively by all allies during the battle for Normandy, and I definitely think it would be really nice to see this in game. When it comes to its ammunition that the 105 can can fire, it could fire a HE shell, heat as well, high explosive anti-tank, smoke, and also an APBC HE shell. So it has the massive range of everything that it can go for. When it comes to its engine, it had the Continental Radial R975 and also had a 5 crew member on top of it as well. The gun's elevation, because obviously a lot of people see this as a vehicle that is only ever pointing upwards, as you can see here. It did actually have a elevation range of -5 gun depression to +66. So yeah, it could definitely be used in an anti-tank role or a direct fire role in War Thunder, and would be nice to see. Moving on with the general idea of howitzers and artillery, we got a big boy. This is Lord Shax, and he's looking at the Panzerhaubitze 2000. Now, you talk about a World War II machine, which is designed for the SPH role. Welcome to the modern day, where we have this instead. So what is the Panzerhaubitze 2000? It's a highly mobile and flexible weapon system. It's deployed in both conventional missions and also asymmetric mission scenarios as indirect fire support. It has a fully automatic handling to it, especially the autoloader, has 60 rounds on board ammunition reserve, and also has access to a 155mm L52 ordnance gun. It's very powerful, as I said, designed for very much precisely smashing a target from absolutely miles away. Has a really high rate of fire as well. Generally, the fire rate is 8 to 10 rounds per minute on this machine, but I have seen reports where it can go way faster than that, especially in short bursts, so that should be something to look at. And it's seen as kind of the gold standard when it comes to effective artillery systems in the modern day. And the other thing about this is it can fire many different rounds. Of course it can, and it's used by 4 NATO member countries at the moment, just showing how it does meet all international requirements when it comes to the general machine. When it comes to its protection, though, it's pretty limited. It's only got welded steel armor and also a spall liner underneath that. Generally, this isn't really a surprise. It's not really supposed to get shot at the majority of the time. It can withstand up to 14.5mm caliber weapons and also splinters of 152 22mm artillery shells. Looking at the ammunition the 155 can fire, it can pretty much throw whatever it needs to. Explosive, frag, multispectral smoke, illumination, a bomblet, smart projectiles are also available for it. It can literally just do whatever it feels like when it comes to it. It is, as I said, the gold standard for these artillery machines. It also has a range of around 56 kilometers, a combat load of 60 rounds, which is, as I said, a fully automatic system that it can fire at. So yeah, it's a pretty interesting machine and has actually seen combat use as well. It's been used since September 2006. It's been deployed in Afghanistan with Canadian forces and also the Royal Netherlands Army during, stuff even like Operation Medusa, by reliably supporting the ISAF troops in Afghanistan. So it is combat proven. It has been used quite a lot, and also it is quite a hefty machine, one that I know a lot of people have asked for when it comes to War Thunder. The next is from Tasty 95215, and he's talking about an idea which, at least for Japan, is kind of interesting. So the first thing you have to understand is this is two ideas married together. The first one is the Type 2 Ho-E, which we actually have in game. The Type 2 Ho-E has access to a short-barreled 75mm. It's generally designed for infantry support. It's not really designed for anti-tank, but it does have access to a heat shell in game, which means that it can actually be used in game, which is very nice. It also gets access to a HE as well, and it is on the chassis of the Chi-He, the Type 1, with the newly designed hexagonal turrets. The idea for this machine, though, that you see before you, is it was marrying that and a 57mm anti-tank gun, which was made at the same time when it comes to the Ho-E. So when the Ho-E was being developed, there was also an anti-tank gun which was being developed too. And I'll just try and get you a picture of that. It's this one right here. And this anti-tank gun was, as I said, it was an experimental gun, and it was started in 1941, and it was essentially just a larger version of the 47mm that you find on other machines. In 1942, it was tested with an experimental APHE shell, and also HE shell, and some practice target shells, and also a heat shell on top of that. And the muzzle velocity was found to be around 850 to 870 meters per second, and while the firing test was successful, they didn't see the gun's performance enough to replace the 47mm AT gun, which was accepted into service and cancelled in 1943. So for them, it was an upgrade, but not enough of a one to be able to change everything. So now we go back to this 57mm Ho-E. So what is this? Well, they took that gun, the anti-tank gun, the 57mm, and they made tank versions of it. And this was found in two versions. You had the Ku model and the Otsu model. These were tested on a Type 2 Ho-E and also a Type 1 Ho-Ni 1 in April 1943. The Ku model had a muzzle velocity of 800 meters per second, and the Otsu model had a muzzle velocity of 900 meters per second. And as with the anti-tank version, the Ku and the Otsu models wasn't considered enough of an improvement over the 47mm tank gun to be put into production. So after that, it is believed that the vehicles which were used for experimentation purposes were put back to their standard forms, the 47mm. So yeah, it would be kind of an interesting little machine, the Ho-E with a 57 instead of a 47. When it comes to the APHE values, it is definitely looked at, and you'd find about 93mm worth depth of penetration using the DeMar formulae, so that would be kind of cool. And then also the Type 2 heat as well when it comes to it. It would be nice to see pictures of this vehicle, but I'm guessing they don't exist. The next one is from Miki Hoshi, and Miki Hoshi today is talking about an ROC vehicle. This is the M41D light tank, and this is born from a, well, requirement really for this vehicle. So the M41A3 had served as the backbone for the ROCA for many years and had proved a good vehicle for what they required. One of the things about it, though, was by the time what would you say? By the time it hit the 90s, it kind of needed a few upgrades, let's be honest. So what happened was, in the 90s, was an interesting situation. But before that, the ROC were looking to replace their M41A3s in the late 80s. They looked at a bunch of different upgrades. They looked at the M8 AGS as the main one, but unfortunately, it was seen as a little bit too expensive to be able to move on because of the overall cost of it. But in 1995, the third Taiwan Strait crisis began, and then President of the ROC was invited to a US university to speak about the Taiwan's democratization experience and what the PRC did, mainland China, if you want to put it like that, began conducting missile tests near ROC controlled islands, as well as mobilizing its forces in Fujian. The PLA Navy also held a naval exercise and amphibious landing assaults. So basically, posturing is the best way to put it. And the US chose to intervene. They sent 2 carrier groups over there, centered around the USS Nimitz and also the Independence. And in a panic, what the ROC decided to do is they allocated a bunch of new emergency money to modernize its M41s to try and get them up to a standard. So if the PLA, decided, or the PRC decided to invade, they would have a combat-ready vehicle that would be able to stop us. So they put $20 billion into the program, and it was placed on a high priority. They had 400 M41A3s, which were selected for the modernization, but the tensions began to cool on the Taiwan Strait, and the US also approved a sale of 300 M60A3 TTSs to the ROC, which meant that there was a big reduction in need for the light tank modernization. So in the end, what actually happened is only $1.2 billion were allocated to the light tank program, and 50 M41Ds were produced. The M41D, with the D actually denoting the diesel engine that it was given, was a 90s modernization of the M41A3. The upgrades mainly were increasing its power when it came to its engine, but also some other things. So it has larger fuel tanks from 530 liters to 760. It has an increased range of 450 kilometers. Then it had a brand new engine in it, the Detroit Diesel 8V71T. This gave it 405 horsepower. They also equipped it with a locally produced 76mm, the M32K. This was based on the cannon originally on the M41A3, with the M32K most notably moving the fume extractor further down the barrel and sporting a different muzzle brake as well. The M1919 coaxial machine gun was replaced by a Type 74 machine gun, and then the protection was also increased subtly with the addition of side skirts and twin banks of smoke discharges on each side of the turret. The largest improvement was the fighting capabilities came with the replacement of the driver IR periscope with Starlight night vision and a thermal sighting system for the gunner. And then they added some electronics, they added a laser rangefinder, and also a digital ballistic computer. This machine was accepted into service in 1999 and initially served with the 854th Armored Brigade, 2nd Battalion on Kinmen Island, and all M41Ds are now located on Taiwan itself, where they continue to serve. So this thing is just a very beefy M41, which could be added to the Chinese tech tree. It could fire AP, APCR, APDS, Heat-FS, and also, of course, APDS-FS, all in this machine. Has the thermal imaging camera for the gunner. I have no idea what BR you'd put this at, but it would be a very interesting machine to see indeed. I would very much look forward to this in-game. Moving on from another light tank idea, we have a wheelie boy, and this is from Nicolas Concu, and he's talking about another Fiat 6616, very similar to what we have in-game, but this time it's got a slightly different turret. The Fiat 6616 was a joint venture between Fiat and Otto Melara after the Second World War. The reason why stuff like this was built in Italy is because they realized during their combat experiences in the Second World War, they really needed light armored and armed vehicles to be able to run around in. It was one of those things, high mobility was definitely prioritized. So they built the Fiat 6614. And Otto Melara experimented by seeing how adding a cannon would do for the vehicle. And they did this in many forms. You know, you can find some of them in-game. The Orbital HVG, for example, or is it the 90mm Cockerel version as well. So after several alterations, the first prototype was built in 1972. And with many minor improvements, Italy would decide to buy 50 for the Carabinieri, which is the military police. And it was a great light vehicle. It could reach high speeds, it could do all the things that a light vehicle could do. And this actually meant that a few other countries got interested in buying it. Peru and Somalia were some of those countries which decided that they wanted to use them. And it was actually used in combat, specifically with Somalia. So this has seen overall, combat. This thing is armed with a 20mm Rheinmetall Mark 20 or RH202 gun. It also has a flare dispenser on it, which could be used for crowd dispersal, and there were also plans of equipping it with a Milan and TOW ATGM launchers, but there is actually other ATGMs that this thing could carry. If it wanted to, it could also carry stuff like Malyutkas, which is very interesting. If you want a picture of that, you can see it right here. So depending on which variant you want, obviously the 20mm becomes standard on the machine, but you could also have stuff such as the missiles on top if you wanted to. The 20mm would also be incredibly annoying to fight in game. It would knock out a lot of barrels and stuff like that, and the overall speed of this vehicle is very, very positive. When it comes to the gun itself, the Rheinmetall gun has a very big rate of fire, 800 to 1,000 rounds per minute. Can fire HEIT, API, and also APDST. So very much one of those guns which could rat-a-tat people if it felt like. But yeah, the major thing this has is the 20mm, then on top of it could have the Milan or a TOW ATGM launcher, or I'm sure other versions of ATGM launchers as well. So yeah, a little vehicle for Italy with with a big punch, I suppose. The next one is from Trodor, and he's talking about the Vextra. Now, if you don't know what the Vextra is, it's another one of those wonderful French designs where they married two ideas together. So in the 80s, the French army launched a program to develop a new vehicle. This was based on the following military ideas. The strategic mobility of a truck, so 100 to 120 kilometers an hour, without generating nuisances such as noise or road degradation, so it had to be light. These new vehicles of the VBM family were intended to accompany battle tanks, notably the Leclerc, and the high-level tactical mobility was therefore essential. In order to benefit from the full range of performance of its tires, it was necessary to provide a centralized inflation device that allows the pressure to be quickly adjusted to the driving conditions, and thus to descend the wheeled vehicles to ground pressure equivalent to those of a battle tank. So that's kind of interesting. So yeah, the Fiat industry launched the experimental vehicle known as the Vextra, or the Vextra, which is what you see before you. These reflections led to a vehicle with a height of about 2 meters and a width of 3 meters, and a lateral movement transmission, the H-shaped transmission, and the fact that only the front wheels steered allowed sufficient interior volume to accommodate a maximum number of people or equipment, which was quite nice, and also a lower turning radius. The Vextra was tested with the French-made TML 105 turret, and this is actually already in the game. I think an earlier version of it is in the game in the form of the AMX-10RC. This is a later variant one because it's the TML 105. It's the stabilized 3-man turret. So this would be the later version of the one that we have in game. It has access to the 105mm CN105 G2 NATO standard low recoil gun, and it has the electrical aiming system, has muzzle brake, fuel extractor, thermal sleeve, all of that wonderful stuff, with a elevation of -6 and +15 for its elevation. The stabilized gun can fire APFSDS, and it has 12 rounds of ready-to-fire 105 ammunition and carried 23 rounds stowed as well. The armored vehicle is protected against 14.5mm heavy machine guns, so nothing too crazy there. But yeah, it's a nice little vehicle. I would definitely say it would fit somewhere for France. What is kind of interesting though is if you see between these vehicles, there are slight differences between them. So it looks like there were some slightly different variants between them, but that's completely fine. It had a crew of 4. It's on obviously the standard wheelbase. The 8-wheeler seems to be quite popular when it comes to War Thunder nowadays. Then we have it powered by the Saab Scania diesel engine. It has 650 horsepower around it, located in the front of the hull, on the right side of it. So yeah, marrying two ideas together of the standard turret and also the IFV. Pretty interesting machine overall. The next one is an interesting one by Synth Jaeger. This is the PVSTRV AMX. Now, this is an AMX-13, and this article confused the hell out of me. So here is the AMX-13. Now, this is for Sweden, just remember. So, after World War II, Sweden started to modernize their tank fleet. They realized that the M42 chassis that they were using from the mid-World War area into the 50s was no bueno. Everybody had moved on when it came to the designs. They had to find something which was better. So, they started a whole new design program in the form of the S-Tank project, which obviously you know, with the cheese wedge and other machines which came along. So instead of upgrading the M42s, so France was very famous during the Cold War. The reason for this is all their innovative designs, especially when it came to their autoloaders and all of their weird and wonderful things. You know, the AMX-50, the Lorraine, the Surbassé, all of these, and of course the AMX-13, which was heavily exported to other areas. So what they did was the Swedish took a AMX-13. They ordered an early version of the AMX-13. The serial number of it in France was 6080450 in order to test it. And the general idea of it was to try and learn from it, to try and influence Swedish studies and build other machines. So I don't think they, at least the way that this article is written, I don't think they had any thought towards making a fleet of AMX-13s. It's just to garner information from them and then make their own subsystems. That seems to be the general idea. So the other thing as well is they had Centurion tanks at the time, which offered a longer range gun and also better protection for the crew. So therefore, the AMX-13 wasn't really considered. But it did influence stuff like the Krangvarm project and then also the S-tank concept. And the AMX-13 and the oscillating turret have influenced a lot of the developments that led to the STRV-103. Now, what is different between this one and a standard AMX-13? Because as I said before, you know, I referred to it as an early version because that's what it's referred to in the article. So when it comes to this, it isn't equipped with the FL10 turret. There are 2 radio antennas as well, and also what are the differences between this? Well, it's an early version of it with a slightly different turret, slightly different wheels, and it should be known as the AMX-13 2A variant, but unfortunately the poster had a bit of an issue with trying to identify what this was specifically. When it comes to the weaponry itself, it's a heavily modified SA-50 gun. It has the original breech and hold. It has a special barrel on it though, and the autoloader and muzzle brake were different as well, because these were designed for Swedish APDS ammunition, which would be the same one on the STRV-74. Also had access to two 8mm machine guns. You know, I had the coaxial one and also a roof machine gun that could be on it. So this is not just a standard AMX-13, this is a modified one which the Swedish use. So it would be different to the other ones we have in game. The only question is, how different would it be? But it is at least something that would be kind of cool. So that is the stuff that was past the developers for the ground vehicles in October of 2020. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Trigger Hippie, Universe, Conte Baraka, Elove Goat, Eugens Terry, Ambrosius McClellan, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, B. Young, Hans, and Samuel Slick for supporting the channel.